Oh, hello there, YouTube. I'm going to do a little, or maybe even a long video to describe my experience of having my first haemodialysis yesterday. I'm going to make the assumption that there is some interest of this subject from my audience. Not out of a sense of ego, but more really it's an interesting subject in itself, and it's not something people tend to come across very often in everyday life. So I'm going to describe my perspectives and my views on what happened in my first session, and I'll answer as many points as I think are relevant about the process. And if you have any questions, then feel free to ask, and I'll do my best to answer them. So first of all, some context. Haemodialysis is one of the options that somebody has to treat severe kidney disease or kidney failure. The other two options are putting a tube in your abdomen and having sort of liquids absorbed around your abdomen to absorb the bad chemicals out of your kidneys, or you could have a kidney transplant. And haemodialysis is a form of dialysis where it involves the blood, not just the kidneys being bathed in fluids outside without the blood involved. And I chose to do haemodialysis because I thought it was the most effective way to do the treatment. And going into the first session, which was yesterday, I had a couple of anxieties. The first anxiety was I wanted to really find out how it would make me feel having the treatment, because I didn't want to sort of over expect I'd feel back to normal and be disappointed. Having my kidney problems has meant that I have a few symptoms that I have to live with now that are quite unpleasant, but they're not. I can live with them. I can get by, but they are difficult to live and work. And I was hoping that by having dialysis I would feel better, but I didn't want to assume that and then be disappointed. So I didn't know how that was going to go. My second big concern and anxiety was really about how am I going to fit in earning a living as a self-employed courier alongside the dialysis sessions. Because you have to do quite long sessions quite often, it does impinge upon your ability to work. And that's the thing I wanted to find out about. What were they really going to want me to do, and how is it going to be fit into the rest of my week? So in preparation for that first session, I had, at the end of April, had an operation done to create a fistula in my left arm. And all a fistula is a guy waving at me. All a fistula is when an artery is connected to a vein, and so the extra pressure from the artery blood makes the vessel more prominent and easier to put needles in for dialysis. So that took about 2 months to heal, and that was ready to be utilised now. So I went in for an appointment with my partner. My partner took me in, and I arrived at this unassuming building on our trading estate. It was quite a functional hospital environment. It's just utilised for dialysis patients only. purpose-built for kidney dialysis. Well, no, the building's not purpose-built for it. The building's just an industrial estate building. But the actual inside part is kitted out to be just a dialysis building. So it's not got lots of frills to it. It doesn't feel like staying in a hotel. It feels like staying in a hospital, but it's very clean, very comfortable, very tidy. Equipment's very new, and it's all very functional, is the word I would use. And I've had faith that it was fully adequately resourced. There's enough people there to help out as well, nurses there to help out. This particular facility is a privately run institution, and I'm pretty sure they cater pretty much only for NHS patients. They may have some private patients that come in, but basically they are there to basically do, in that local area of the country, kidney dialysis for the NHS. The next nearest one is Grantham, the next one is Peterborough. It's like 2 in Peterborough, 1 in Grantham, 1 in Boston. So that in my area is my choices. I didn't get a choice about where to go. I just went to the first place that had a space. And as it is, this is not a bad place for me to go to. It's only about 40 minutes from my home. So I arrived at 1 o'clock and sat in the waiting room for a bit. Then a nurse came to see me and then took me to where I was going to be. And it was a ward. I'll call it a ward, basically, because I'm used to that terminology. It's a row of beds, about 8 or so beds in a row, with a dialysis machine next to each bed. And when I arrived, I was shown to the first bed next to the entrance door, which I was happy about. And there was probably about 3 or 4 other people in the other beds. And also there's probably about 4 or 5 separate rooms that are for people that I think are more seriously ill. And so I sat semi-recumbent on this bed, kept all my clothes on, including my shoes, and then the nurse sort of went through the process with me, answered my questions, and took down some details, and did a bit of introduction. And I'm really pleased my partner was there, because another of my anxieties that I wasn't really able to articulate, but she was because of my autism. I feel a lot more comfortable being isolated. I don't want to be open to public view, and so there was the capacity there to have a curtain drawn to my right. To my left, I was at the first bed. To my left was just a wall. To my right was the rest of the ward. And luckily, they were happy to pull the curtain to one side and give me that privacy, which I was not able to ask for myself, and my partner did. I'm really thankful for her for doing that. So then we went through the process. I asked lots of questions. The nurse who treated me was brilliant. My experience of all the nurses there was really good, but the one that was sort of doing the dialysis with me was really, really amazing. Made the experience really good. She sort of knew, I suppose part of her skill as a nurse, to be able to judge what each patient needs, what kind of care they need, and I needed to have information. So the first thing that happened was the nurse numbed my left arm with some spray, and then she put in a needle attached to a short tube. The tube was about 30 centimetres long, and the needle was put into my arm just above my wrist. It was into the fistula that had been created at the end of April. And then that tube was where the blood was going to come out of my body. She then strapped that down so it's secure, and then put another needle with a short tube attached to it, about 10 centimetres up my arm towards my elbow, again further up the fistula. And that needle was going to have my blood coming back into my body. Now both of those tubes were about 30 centimetres long, At this point, she was able then to draw some blood from the tube to use for testing purposes. And what they do is they test the blood at the start of the procedure and at the end of the procedure. I also had my blood pressure taken on my other arm. I was informed that from now on, because of the fistula, I'm not allowed to have any blood pressure readings taken in my left arm and no blood tests taken in my left arm. So the next thing to do was she connected up some tubing to both of the tubes in my arm, and then laid it up to my left shoulder and strapped it down on my shoulder. So I got two tubes coming up to my shoulder, sort of stuck down with sort of the medical tape they have. And then those tubes went to the kidney dialysis machine, which was next to me. I want to describe that machine to you if you are sort of mechanically minded. I would say there's three distinct parts to it. The first part was the base, the bottom bit, just the wheels, so you can wheel it around. Then the main bulk of the machine was a kind of, I'd call it a board, but that makes it sound cheap and nasty. It was a properly designed board to then attach to it clips which had two pumps and then a filter tube. And the filter tube was sort of a solid plastic transparent tube, about 30 centimetres, about 10 centimetres long, about 3 centimetres in diameter. And in that tube it had some filter material. Then the tubes that were coming from my body were then attached to the machine through the pump, through the filter, and then back to my body. So that was quite simple. It was quite simple. There was a bit of bending, and the tubes were attached to various places. Basically, it was just a board with clips and fancy clips and tubing. And the pump itself was sort of like a circular 8 centimetre or so diameter device just going round. You can see it all open. It was going round, and the tube sort of went round the pump, and so that obviously pumped some liquid through the tube. So that was one set of tubes. There's another set of tubes and a second pump, and that had clear liquid going through it, which I'm going to call distillate. And that clear liquid also went into the filter. So you had two tubes going into the filter at the top, two tubes coming out of the filter at the bottom, and then one pump for the distillate, one pump for blood. And that's basically that bit of the machine. And the top of the machine was like a touch screen and some lights at the top. And that top bit was where you could control the device, control some settings, see some printouts. It was really well designed, really easy to see, very colourful. It had alarms and lights to warn the nurses at various points. So it was a reasonably basic device in terms of its design, but actually it was very functional, very user friendly, I would say, for the nurse to use. And as a patient, I could see the figures, the readings that are being measured as well. I can remember some of them. So I'll come back to that in a minute. Right, so now, I was now connected up to this machine, and the pump was set at a certain speed, and there's several things you can control when it comes to haemodialysis, as in how well the process happens. And the main two are how long the patient stays on the machine for. And I was due for my first session to stay there for an hour and a half. And the second thing, the main thing, is you can change the speed of the pump. And my speed was 180. I'm gonna say litres per minute, but that could be a completely wrong unit. It was 180, which was a reasonably slow rate for this particular process. So I was doing a shorter time than usual and a slower rate than usual. And you could see the blood going through and in the tubes, and then it was all sort of just basically a red mass going in and out. And I did ask the nurse, there is at any one moment 300 millilitres of blood not in my body, going through the tubes, filter and pump. Now, the other thing that was very interesting was that about just above my shoulder in the tube there was a little tap, I'd call it, and an access point. And if the patient needs medication that's liquid, you can just inject it directly into the bloodstream by using this tap on the tubes. So no need to use the injection into your arm. It sounds simple now, but I was quite amazed that you could just inject a medication straight into your blood just with this little tap by your shoulder. And obviously it could be anywhere, it could be anywhere on the machine, the tap itself could be anywhere. It's just easy access by my shoulder. In terms of the filter, so the two fluids run down into in through the filter. Now it's not that they don't mix. Basically, the filter forms a membrane where small particles, molecules, can diffuse across the membrane from one side to the other. And the main things that I remember that were coming out of your blood were creatine, which is a waste product. I think some sort of uric acid maybe, or urea was the other thing that came out. And then electrolytes like potassium and phosphates, which if they build up in your body can cause problems. I found out that phosphates can cause problems over the long term. Potassium, which I already knew this, potassium, if it gets too high, basically can stop your heart. So potassium ions have to be removed because they don't get removed by the kidney by this machine, otherwise you end up having heart problems. So potassium is like an immediate problem, phosphates are more of a long-term problem. But obviously the way that you can adjust what is removed is the makeup of the distillate. Briefly, if you have a very low concentration of potassium in the, let's say it's just water in the distillate, then my blood having a high amount of potassium is going to diffuse across the filter into the distillate exiting my body. If you wanted to put stuff into the body, let's say you wanted for some reason to put something in, let's say you wanted to put in, I don't know, sugar. I don't know, maybe, I don't know, you would never do this. Or something small like glucose. You could put in glucose in the distillate, and that would then diffuse across the distillate to my blood if there's less in my blood than this distillate. As long as there's an imbalance of whatever you're trying to move from the blood or the distillate, it will move across the membrane in that direction. So from a high concentration to a low concentration. So because my blood has a high amount of phosphates in it, for example, that will then be taken away by the distillate by the diffusion. So that's the science behind it. It's really quite simple. And another aspect I didn't know about is one of the things that can happen with kidney problems, it's not happened to me at the moment, but it will happen if I don't know anything about it, is you can get edema, where you get a build-up of water in your body because you can't get rid of enough water. And usually it builds up in your ankles and lower legs, because that's where gravity takes it. But this process can remove water. So you can get water removal from your blood by this process as well. So there is like a target amount of water loss that they can also change by hemodialysis. At the moment, my water levels are fine, they're leaving it as it is, but in time they will then start removing water from my blood as well as the waste products. So I was then on the bed. My left arm couldn't move. It was resting on a pillow, but it just couldn't move. So I had to use my right arm for everything. On this occasion, they allowed. Well, to be fair, they were very good. Anyway, I think the way that the hospital approach people being with the patient is they don't really encourage it, but if the patient wants it to happen, they have a visitor with them. And they brought a chair through from the waiting room for my partner to sit at, so she was comfortable, and then she was there all the time with me. For most of it, we were just sort of reading when I was just doing nothing else. At the start of it, we were obviously talking and asking questions. And my partner was a great support, and I was really pleased she was there. And all the nurses were good as well, just repeat. And I had the privacy of the curtain, so it was all very comfortable in the end. The actual, when she put the needle in, did hurt a little bit. And but it wasn't too bad. I was brave. So then I sat there for an hour and a half. Machine counted down, and then with about 5 minutes to go, it was a little alarm to warn the nurses, and then they came back and they sort of, in the end, disconnected me. During the process, I had about 3 or 4 blood pressure measurements taken, and at the end of the process, before they took the needles out of my arm, they did another blood test so they could test for the outcome. The actual tubing that was used is one-use tubing, so it's all just disposed of. It's not used again, it's not cleaned, it's got rid of. So I confirmed what they want me to do in terms of duration and frequency. They want me to come in every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday, so it's going to be 3 times a week. Ultimately it's going to be a 4-hour session each time, but the next session I'm going to do, which is tomorrow, Saturday, will be 2.5 hours, and then another 2.5 hours on Tuesday, then it'll be 3.5 hours on Thursday, and then probably, I think, the following Saturday it'll be 4 hours, and that'll be my schedule. I did ask if I could have a morning session rather than an afternoon session, but there was no availability at the moment. And the reason why I asked for that is I want to have the option to do some work after I've done my dialysis. At the moment I can't really do any work during that day. If I'm going to get in at 1 o'clock, finish at 5, I can't really do anything beforehand very easily. So I'm on a sort of wish list for the mornings, but at the moment there's no space. So that is the only kind of downside from my point of view. Well, the downside is I've got to do 2 days in the week, Tuesday and Thursday, and I've got to do 4 hours, and that's going to really impinge on my ability to work. I'm going to try and be flexible. I'm going to try and sort of still get as much work as I can do in, but I have to be a bit more realistic about what I can earn. In terms of how I felt, I was warned by the nurse that I would feel tired, or I might feel tired after this process. And interestingly, about 15 minutes before the end, I did feel a lot more tired than the start. And by the time I'd finished it, I felt like I could have had a nap, which is what the nurse said was quite normal. But it's interesting because I hadn't done anything apart from just lie there, or semi lie there, and then just have blood going in and out of my body. So it was interesting how that tires you out. So when I came out, I felt I was well enough to drive. I wasn't going to drive that day because my partner was with me, but I felt like I felt in terms of at the end of a long day, but not when I'm really, really tired. So it wasn't. I could have driven myself home, I reckon. I think that's safe. I'm not sure I could do a day's work though. That'd be pushing it. Right, so I think that's everything I can think about what happened. I did ask about, in time, the option of doing home dialysis, and that is a possibility. I think it depends on how much space we've got and how much support I've got to actually to do the needles into my arm. But if I can do home dialysis in the future, that does open up sort of doing it at night time when I'm in bed, and then having a full day able to work, and then perhaps do it for 2 hours every night rather than doing it for 4 hours 3 times a week. So that's probably the next step. In my head, the plan is keep doing the dialysis, hopefully feel better. From feeling better, hopefully then lose weight so that I can then have a transplant. Because at the moment I can't have a transplant because I weigh too much. And then have a transplant means I may be able to get to a point where I have more or less a normal life again. Now that's a long road ahead, very complicated road ahead, and it's one step at a time. The other thing that I was going to mention is, I've forgotten it. Let me just think about what it was. Oh, it's gone out of my head. Actually, I'll briefly tell you my symptoms. There are 5 symptoms that I hope will be better, and I'll put them in order of how they are at the moment. So these are the 5 things that really kind of impinge upon my life to a greater or lesser extent at the moment, and I'm hoping that by having dialysis these things go. I get numbness in my legs if I walk or stand for any length of time, and that's quite severe, and if I don't sit down I then basically fall over, and that can be very uncomfortable to the extent that it's quite painful as well. Sort of numbness is not the right word. It's a weird feeling, sort of a prickly feeling in my toes, running up my legs, onto my buttocks, and it just gets worse and worse and worse if I don't sit down. Second factor is I'm breathless. Anything physical, just walking upstairs, getting out of my van, I get breathless all the time. Thirdly, I am tired all the time, fatigued to a greater or lesser extent. Fourthly, I would say I get quite severe cramps at night in my legs. That depends somewhat on what I'm eating. So if I eat sweet foods at night, which I try not to, then that can be a problem, and it is quite painful. And lastly, I definitely feel that my memories got worse. Recall of words, remembering ideas, definitely a lot worse, and I get a bit of brain fog, which I hope is to do with this problem. One of the things I was going to mention, which was in my head a moment ago, it's just come out of my head. As I was talking, I thought about it, and then it went out of my head again. What was it? The more I get anxious about thinking about it, the more I forget about it. Let me just give you a few moments to think about it. I think it was about kidney. I asked the nurse this: is kidney dialysis about staying alive, or is it about feeling well? Was how I put it. And she said it's basically a bit of both, but basically the reason for dialysis is fundamentally, without it I won't survive. And as a result of having dialysis, I will over time begin to feel a little bit better. So I have to get this into context. I'm not doing this out of choice. This is a necessity. If I don't do dialysis, I won't be able to keep living. Whereas I'm missing the functions I had, how I felt before, and I need to get my head around. It's not about getting back to how I was before, it's about not dying. And that's disappointing to be in that situation, but I think that's kind of maybe a better way to look at it. So I have a certain amount of symptoms that I mentioned, and I hope that they are alleviated or they disappear. I hope I get back to feeling normal, but fundamentally the point of this is that I don't die. My EGFR score is now 7, down from 8 about 2 months ago, and that's, if you don't remember from our previous video, is kind of out of 100, and that's an indication of my kidney function. I think below 15 is key stage 5 kidney failure, so 7 is kind of halfway between 15 and 0. Right, so I'll leave it at that. I think that's everything I can think of. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me, or any comments, of course, if you want to share any experiences you've got along these lines. That'd be really helpful. And I may or may not do more. This isn't meant to be sort of a first in a series of, but I might do some more if I think things are relevant. But yeah, otherwise I'll tell you about my day when I finish today. There's a bit of stuff on the road here, so I'll let the video run just in case you're interested to see what's happening here. It looks like there's a couple of cars to my left. Oh, there's another car there. Oh yes, this silver car is going to the back of that white car to my left. No, I don't think there's any injuries, but there's obviously some damage to the car. And then this silver car to my left here has been hit at the back, and quite severely hit the back by, I'm guessing, this van. So 4 vehicles involved in this crash. Right, farewell.